I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I'm speaking with Laura Montgomery, the costume designer for What We Do in the Shadows on FX and FX on Hulu. The first question I wanted to ask is, I was looking over your filmography, and you had things like What We Do in the Shadows and Spiral. You have a couple other like horror genre projects on there, and I was curious: are you a personal fan of horror movies and entertainment?
I'm not actually. I enjoy a vintage horror, like a classic horror, a psychological thriller, something like a Rosemary's Baby. I'm really into. The Saw franchise of movies, I have to say, the body horror is not for me. But working on it was okay because you know what's going to happen, so you know it's all fake. Um, I like the macabre. I like gothic sensibilities, so things like Shadows or TV shows like Buffy. Those I'm really into. But I have to say, horror is not my bag really.
So, what's it been like to do costume designs for these types of projects?
I think it's about finding an angle. So in Spiral, what really hooked me, I'd worked with the director Darren Baldwin before, and I really enjoyed working with him. And his take on it was that he wanted to have visually, he really wanted Spiral to look like a film noir. And so he had this idea of it was going to be the hottest day in summer, and he really wanted that noir sensibility. So for me, design wise, there was something really interesting there with the costumes. And he was really passionate about describing his approach. So that was what hooked me with that. And with Shadows, even though it's kind of like horror genre, it's also just wickedly funny. For a vampire show, we actually don't deal with a lot of blood. I've dealt with more blood on things like, Gen V, or Gen V was a lot of blood. And then Shadows is such a feast for costuming. Like it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to be able to do all the periods, all the builds, mixed with contemporary costumes. So as long as there's an interesting angle, then I'm happy to work on it.
So, you have getting to design all these costumes for all these characters has been incredible to watch over the past 5 seasons. You were first the assistant costume designer for the first 2 seasons, then became the lead costume designer. I'm curious as to which character has been the most challenging for you to nail a look for.
Um, I was really lucky that for the leads, I think the looks were already very established. They had closets, and Amanda Neal, the designer who'd done the movie and who'd done the first 2 seasons of the show, she really kind of established who those characters were. And so a big part of it for me was I didn't want to deviate from that too much because, these are who these people are. What was really great was when the script would give us an opportunity to deviate, like when Nadja opens a nightclub or when they go off and they do something where we can expand their closets. And then nothing was really, I would say the general challenge would be when day players, it was a challenge and a blessing. Day players would come in, and quite often I would have kind of a carte blanche based on the information in the script of figuring out who these people are. And because they're vampires, they can be, we know they're old, but are they 400 years old? Are they 700 years old? That's a big difference in how they're going to dress. And so sometimes it was a challenge just like coming up with new things constantly, like who is this person? Who is that person? It's a 22-minute comedy. There isn't a lot of time to tell the story. But it was also great to be able to pitch like, okay, we've never done 1600s. Can this guy be, can Dominicus the Dreadful be that? And so, but then, coming up with being creative um, all the time, I would say that was the biggest challenge, but also a huge blessing.
On the flip side of that, I'm curious as to are there any specific outfits that you really had a very fun time designing and bringing to life?
I can't lie. Nadia is my favorite. I mean, I love them all, but she's the only woman in the lead cast, and we don't get a ton of female day players either. So getting to play with, the beautiful fabrics and the cuts, it's a really that kind of 1890s period meets with 1980s is a really fun period to design. So I think any of her, if it's a beautiful the tartan traveling dress from, I think it was season 4. That was a favorite. This beautiful off the shoulder black brocade and lace gown that she wears. And really in the nightclub season when she got to go kind of wild and over the top and we got to use color and sequins and lots of fun elements, I think, yeah, she's my favorite.
And what about her little doppelganger doll?
Oh my God. You know what? I misspoke. Dolly is my favorite because for many of Nadia's costumes, there is a doll version that is so heart-wrenchingly cute. I mean, all I need to do is walk past someone with the little, because the costume is maybe like this big, it's smaller than a baby. And the people who work on it take so much care. Usually we'll just assign one cutter sewer to Dolly because often where it's about scaling down the fabric, scaling down the buttons, making things work for the puppeting of the doll. And then what they produce, you just show it to someone and you get this very visceral reaction of, oh, it's just so cute, but also so beautiful and so intricate. Even though we don't see a lot of her, we do. It's amazing the amount of detail that gets put into her costume.
So I'm also curious as to, when you're designing costumes for a character, does the cast have any input, or do you consult with the cast into what their characters' costumes might look like?
Definitely. And that's a big part of my process too, is kind of involving the cast. And working on a show for 6 seasons, you really get to know there's a lot of shorthand. So there are things that I know that they like to wear, don't like to wear. And we also really know the characters as well now. So we know what their color palettes are very established. Their looks are very established. But especially when it comes to transitions or growth or arcs in the storyline. Harvey often comes with a lot of ideas for Guillermo. And what I really appreciate is quite often they'll be rooted in, because Harvey is Mexican American and so is Guillermo. So he'll often have some ideas that come from his culture that really make sense. There was one idea where he wanted kind of a sparkly vest, and he talked about growing up, you can accompany your cousins or your friends or whatever to their quinceañeras, and that's called a chambelán, and you get to wear this like flashy vest. And so he said maybe his vest for this can be flashy because he probably have those, or he would have worn them. Like he would have been the perfect chambelán. So things like that, where they're bringing something else, because the cast is thinking as much about their character as I am. I'm thinking about the clothes, but they're thinking about their history and their stories and what their choices are. So it's definitely a consideration beyond, this sleeve is too tight, or don't forget I have to do a backflip in this.
One of the things that I always think is interesting in sort of any field is that sometimes when you're designing something, you can be a little unsure about how it's going to look until you see it in real life, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's like this fits it perfectly. And I was curious as to, have you ever had any in doing costumes for the show, have you ever had any designs where you were kind of unsure about them, but then once you actually saw it materialize, you were like, okay, yes, that is what I was going for?
Definitely. I think, everyone has their own process, and mine is very visual. I can think about what it's going to look like. I can sketch what it's going to look like. I'm not a good illustrator at all. So that, it's like a decent representation. But I need to see it. So I usually start with draping. So even if it's just throwing the fabric over the dress form and kind of like, belting it or moving it in the way that I want it to look, then that gives me a bit of an idea. And that, yes, I always need to see it. To know what it's going to look like.
I have to ask, I think one of the best episodes of the of the previous season was the Pride Parade episode. And I loved with the party that they have at the end. I love the fashion of that party. And in particular, I love Anthony Adamaniak with his shirt that says, "Hey, I'm being gay over here." Was Was that your was that your idea? Was that written in the script?
No, that was in the script. And I think even just having the face on it was in the script. So what came down to us was choosing the color of the shirts and then making the shirts. And then in those instances, his look is a shop look. So that's something where, we wanted a flashy suit. And so sometimes you kind of find it in the fitting. So he tried on, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 suits, and then you add the accessories and you start putting things together. You see everything on the body and you realize, oh, he needs a sparkly fedora, or he needs this to pull it all together. So sometimes it's not until the actor puts on the costume in a fitting that either it's going to work or it needs something else. And it's a process. And then sometimes they get to set and you realize, this has happened to me. Fred Armisen was in a jacket that was as it turns out, the exact same color as the backdrop on the set. And so I had to just change it on the fly.
Well, going from one Donald Trump impersonator to another, we were talking earlier. You just got back from France. You were there in Cannes for the film the Ali Abbasi film, The Apprentice, which just premiered there about with Sebastian Stan playing Donald Trump and his rise to prominence in New York real estate. What was your experience like working on The Apprentice, and was there anything you particularly enjoyed about designing costumes for the 1970s and the 1980s?
That making that movie was for me an incredible experience that really invigorated me, and I just felt so creatively inspired. And working with Ali was amazing. He had a very specific vision. He wanted to really push the vulgarity, especially in the 80s. And so the directive he gave to me and the production designer at the beginning was, if you're going to show me 2 options, I'm always going to choose the one that's the most like vulgar, offensive. He really wanted to go for that. So it was great to be able to collaborate with him really closely. I love period costuming. I think I prefer to be able to do builds and do periods. So the fact that it was 70s and 80s was such a gift. And then it was really just such an inspiring experience, because I got the script and I loved Gabe Sherman's script instantaneously. I fell in love with the story and the script, and I just felt it was funny because as I was first reading the script, I was hearing, I don't even remember at what point we were in Trump's like the saga of Trump, but I was hearing news about him on the radio, and I just thought it was so interesting that this story of his relationship with Roy Cohn, how it echoes into the future. It's 50 years in the future, and it's still shaping the time that we live in. So that was just, so I really wanted to be able to help tell that story, and I really connected with Ali's vision for it about talking about fascism and truth. And then once you see the movie, Sebastian and Jeremy's and Maria's performances, and Martin as Fred Trump, it was a lot of improv, interestingly, very much like Shadows. But they just knew their characters inside and out. So collaborating with them on costumes was really amazing too, because Jeremy, like, he knew more about Roy Cohn than I did. And so he just knew what felt right, and he appreciated the details. And it was really incredible to be on set and watch everyone work. We had a very low budget, so that was challenging. But I'm really, really proud of that movie.
Last thing I wanted to ask you about is, we are an awards site, and you had an amazing experience in 2022, when you won the costume design Emmy for What We Do in the Shadows, specifically for the Wellness Center episode, which is one of my favorite episodes. What was it like? What was that whole experience like winning the Emmy that year?
I would say shock of the century would be an understatement. Like, there was no hubris on my part. I just did not have any expectation whatsoever, that I just assumed that we would not win, because we're up against, I mean, the quality of the work of my fellow nominees was so, they're like, there's no, how do you even compare it? And our show is so different too, that I just thought that truly the nomination felt like the win. The fact that we were recognized, we're a 22-minute comedy. Like, with not a lot of money. We make it in Toronto. But I think it's a testament to how much people love, my win was a win for the whole show. It's how much people love the writing, how much people love the cast. I think that show got a lot of people through the pandemic too. A lot of people came up to me afterwards and said that during the pandemic they wanted, because the show is pure comedy. It touches on larger issues, but it's just very funny. So I think for a lot of people, it really helped them during lockdown. Um, and yeah, so it was gratifying. And I feel like the whole Shadows team, the whole Shadows family really sharing that.
I can definitely tell you that that was true for both myself and my mother. We both discovered the show in the during the pandemic, and we both and it's been a very nice. It was a very nice source of joy for us in an incredibly crazy time.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best over the next couple of months. And to all of our viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to this video. And don't forget to go to goldderby.com to update your Emmy predictions in advance of the nominations in July. Thanks so much.